Hello and welcome to Calibre Conversations, our online book festival where we chat to a range of authors in the hope of introducing you to books to add to your reading list and get you enjoying more books in National Year of Reading. My name is Emma and I'm delighted to be joined by author Ruth Foster, whose debut novel, A Perfect Year, won the 2025 Comedy Women in Print Prize in the Self-Published Award category, and it was described by the judges as a masterclass in comic precision. So first of all, hello and welcome to you, Ruth.
Hi Emma, and it's lovely to be taking part in this for Calibre, so nice to be here.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. So straight into A Perfect Year, that's your first novel, but it's not actually your first adventure into the world of publishing. So can you tell us a bit about your career and background and your journey into becoming a writer and having your first novel published?
Yes, of course. I never thought I would publish a novel, but having said that, I grew up in a family where everybody read all the time. And I remember finding bits of novels started, just a paragraph written by my father in the flyleaf of novels that he was reading. And we even read at, this is shocking really, but we even read at meal times. I know nowadays people sit and stare at screens, but we'd all sit around the tables reading our books while we ate, which would probably would have been very frowned upon. But we were just a reading family. But having said that, I never thought that I would go into that sort of world. And I was very sensible. I studied for a law degree and thought I was going to go into practice as a lawyer. But for various reasons, obviously something was directing me in the right direction. I got sidetracked into publishing. It wasn't the fun sort of glamorous fiction publishing that we hear about. It was actually law publishing, because that was what I was studied, and it was serious academic business type of publishing. And you asked about writing. In fact, the very first words I ever published were to do with the way books sometimes were printed at that time. There'd be a run of pages and you'd get a blank page in the middle. And that would be very confusing to people that had ordered these books. So instead, it was part of my job to print on these on these blank pages the words, "This page is intentionally blank." And of course, that's a complete contradiction, because the moment you print that on it, it's no longer blank. But the idea was to make it clear to people that they didn't have a copy of the book that was technically in error. So that was my very first bit of writing in print. But I did lots of things around that throughout my career, which was mainly in publishing. So I was writing blurbs and publicity copy and information articles and tiny little bits and pieces. At one time, actually, I went into foreign languages publishing, and I was publishing French and Spanish language courses. So I'd always done lots and lots of little bits of writing on around the fringes of writing a real novel.
I never thought about someone actually being the person to write this page is intentionally blank in a book. That's amazing. Fantastic. I love the fact that you grew up in meal times with just reading around the table as well. That's my perfect mealtime, really. So in A Perfect Year, the story is told and it unfolds in quite a unique format. So can you tell us a bit about the story and what the inspiration was behind the style in which it is written?
Yes, because this is what the book is all about, really, isn't it? I first started getting round robin letters in either the very late 1980s or the early 1990s. And in fact, I've never forgotten the very first one that I received was actually from somebody that I barely knew. It was a distant colleague of my other half. And it went into great detail about a personal tragedy that she'd suffered. And if you cast your mind back, those were the early days of photocopying. It was way before social media. So it was really quite unusual to receive something which was full of very, very kind of gut-wrenching personal detail, but that had been Xeroxed however many times she'd done it and put in with her Christmas cards and sent out to people. These days, it's really common on social media. I think we've come a long way from this kind of typical reserved British stereotype where people didn't discuss their backgrounds. But that was the first example. After that, I started getting them every year, and I'm sure some of the people listening to this will remember them. But people put all the kinds of details about their year into these letters. And what would happen is I talked about my family kitchen table when I was growing up, everybody reading. When we started receiving these letters, and I had young children by then, we'd sit and read them out to each other, and we'd laugh at the funny bits, and think about, reflect on the sad bits and discuss them. And it kind of brought us together as a family in a way. Until one day I was sort of collecting them all up, and I thought, oh, I wonder, I've always had an imagination. I thought, I wonder if I could construct a novel out of them. And I didn't do anything about it for ages, but the thought sat at the back of my mind. And what I did do, from every year from then on, is keep the letters. Instead of recycling them or chucking them out, I started keeping them, and I still have an enormous box file with well, over 20 years worth of round robin letters in them, that some of my friends now know about since the book was published. But anyway, that's how it started. And of course, once I did sit down to write a perfect year, I had all the raw material sitting there waiting for me in this box.
Oh, fantastic! So that's really important as well. I think having that, kind of a ready archive of things and material to go back to, isn't it? That must have made the your job a little bit easier in terms of kind of inventing the story too.
It was crucial. It was absolutely crucial. Yes, yes. Without those letters, I don't think I would have known um, quite where to go with them, and it informed the characters as well.
Do you write round robin letters yourself, or just receive them?
Not the first person to have asked me that. I don't, funnily enough. I've always, I mean, I send greetings to people every year. I've always liked to write a personal note. I love writing, so I find I end up writing. I suppose the nearest I get is a sort of individual letter to everybody, but that's not the same as a round robin, is it?
It's well, no, but it's a nice thing to do as well, isn't it? And actually, just you mentioning the characters, there. So I want to get onto the characters. I love the characters in this story; they're absolutely brilliant. But just to go to the setting of the story, just first of all, so that it's set in a fictional. It's a village, isn't it? Not a village, would you say? Or
It's a place that can't decide if it's a village, a town, or a suburb. So it's called Upley Rising. It's broadly in the home counties, in the sense it's somewhere in the sort of satellite places around London that have gradually been absorbed into London. It could, in theory, have been set in a similar setting around any large city in Britain, Manchester or Birmingham or somewhere, but it was set in a fictional county called Thamesshire, and it's the sort of place, I guess, because there's an element in round robin letters of people wanting to keep up with the Joneses. So it's the kind of, certainly the road where the three main characters live. Is the sort of road where people who are the kind of people that want to make sure they're doing the right thing and keep up with everyone else live. But the place itself, Upley Rising, it's sort of village stroke town stroke suburb. It's got all the elements you'd recognise if you went there. It's got this Gothic war memorial in the middle. It's got an old society called the Upley Society. It's quite traditional, although we see it change throughout the book. And it thinks it's very respectable. But the one thing it does have is an annual sort of semi-pagan summer festival called the Wellspring Festival. And that, if you like, is the sort of underbelly of Upley Rising, because strange things happen every year that become more and more unpredictable at this festival. And I kind of drew that from the festivals that go on in this country that I think are often overlooked. But we have things like the Lewes Bonfire Festival, the Gloucestershire Cheese Rolling Contest. What's the other one? Can't think of the other one now, but they happen all over the country.
there's a Wellington boot throwing one, I think, as well, isn't there, or something like that? There's sort of
But I've heard of that. I'm not sure exactly what happens there. But I think they're a fascinating aspect of life in this country, and I just thought there's a respectable place like Upley Rising needed its own festival, so that's what it's got.
I feel like everybody would know an Upley Rising. I think from wherever you're from, I think you've either passed through or you've experienced one before. So it felt a very familiar place. And within Upley Rising, you've got the just most brilliant array of characters. So they're very different and they bring opposing viewpoints, importantly, and personalities to the story. So did you start writing with the three main characters in mind, or did they kind of change as the story progressed and you added more, or how did that work?
I thought at the beginning, wasn't sure whether I thought about writing a lot of round robin letters over 2 or 3 years. That would have involved lots and lots of characters, and I thought that's going to be quite hard to maintain a narrative, or, tell a good story. So what I decided to do was go for three really contrasting characters, and I based them. I told you earlier that the box file contained all the raw material. When I went through it, I realised that people who write round robin letters, that, well, certainly the ones I received, fall into very distinct categories, and so the characters echo these categories. And I mean, just to describe them briefly, we've got Caroline, who is what used to be called a yuppie, very aspirational, married to an advertising executive, really wants to push herself everywhere, and her letters are so full of amazing things that have apparently happened to her that you end up wondering if you can believe her or not. She's in literature, she's what's called the ultimate unreliable narrator. But as time goes on, you do start to find out that she has vulnerabilities as well. So that's one extreme, if you like. And then you have Alison, who is a librarian, but she's not if you like, the classic image of a librarian that people might have of somebody who's very organized and has everything under control. She's actually quite a shambolic librarian, and always disorganized, with a partner who is quite similar. And so she's a complete contrast to Caroline. And then you have the third main character, who is Robert, who is a very respectable London solicitor who moves out to Upley Rising to work in a country practice to help look after his mother, and also his brother, who has extreme learning disabilities. So those three characters reflect the types of letters, and I've given them, or types of writers, and I've given them names. So Caroline, whose letters are full of the amazingly wonderful things that have happened every year, that category is called the bragster. And then the next category is called the humble bragster, and that's Alison, who kind of belittles everything she does. But so here's Alison, who is pretending not to be showing off, and she's talking about her daughter Eleanor, who's about 7 at the time, and she says, "We laughed out loud when Eleanor's end-of-term report said she was top of her class in maths. How could 2 arts graduates have produced this prodigy? But the joke was on us when she lost 3 baby teeth in a month and decided to charge the tooth fairy double for molars and to add interest for forgetting." So she's managing to kind of pretend that they're all very humble about this, but of course she's showing off that Eleanor has come top of her class in maths. Caroline, who is the straightforward bragster, this is one of her early letters about her when they've just got married, and she says, "What a perfect year it's been, and how better to end it than with our very own Christmas message in this inaugural letter from Charles and me as a married couple. Beginning with what the East Berkshire Listener singled out as the standout county event of the year. Charles and I were delighted to welcome 238 of our closest friends and family to make our special day truly memorable." So that is the bragster letter. And then finally, you have Robert, who is much more serious. And his category I've called the philosopher, and I do get wonderful letters every year from somebody who manages to kind of reflect at a very, at a very thought-provoking level on the year past. So this is Robert writing in 1997, which was quite a major year in news for this country. And he begins, "There is normal life and there is life according to the newspapers. This year, the two converged. 1997 was agreed by all to be momentous, heartbreaking, game-changing. We lost a people's princess, gave up British Hong Kong, and learned that a sheep had been cloned. So that's Robert. So that's kind of summarizes the main characters.
They're all brilliant as well because through their stories, obviously, you get introduced to the sort of what I call the sub characters underneath. So their family and friends and that. So you get a real picture of everybody that's actually within the story as well. So I mean, if you had to pick and if you had to choose to live next door to one of them, so either Alison, Robert, or Caroline, who do you think you'd rather live next door to?
Be tricky. I mean, Caroline, she's awful. She's an awful person, but she has some really good connections. And she's got, as a brother-in-law, this famous rock star called Ditch, who's always turning up. So that would be really interesting. Robert would be incredibly reliable and helpful if you were in trouble. So, he would be a great neighbour to have. Alison would be really friendly, and I'm sure, you'd never be short of a cup of tea if you popped in there. So I don't think I can answer this. All I can say, Emma, is that a soap opera like Neighbours hasn't been so successful on TV for so many years for nothing. Everybody likes to think about their neighbours, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. It's what makes us tick, isn't it? I think most of the time with that. I think I love. I mean, I actually ended up in the end. I went from Caroline getting on my nerves a little bit, but then actually in the end I actually warmed to her. I really liked her towards the end. And Alison, I think she just made me laugh all the time. The book's very funny, which we'll come on to in a minute, and all the characters play a part in that actually, but Ali sort of had a way with words that was just sort of my sort of humour, I think. So I kind of I think I'd pick her to sort of go out with, I think, in that respect. But yeah, they're great characters. And just to mention as well that the action, obviously, as you mentioned, it takes place all from kind of the late 80s to the early 2000s, and it mentions events happening at the time. So as well as kind of being a massively entertaining read, it also acts as a kind of social history too. Is there any reason why you chose to set it across that time frame? And again, did you have to go back and research some of the events that you mentioned to include it in the plot?
Yeah, it had to be set then, really, because it's the time frame for round robin letters. I mean, they do still happen, but far fewer now because of social media, which is a shame, I think, because there's nothing like a snapshot of a year. But it had to be that time frame. So I really set them over the years that since I started receiving them. It probably kicked off, they say that technology fuels creativity. So it was probably kicked off by the rise of the office photocopier, to be honest. But all those years, from the late 80s up to about 2007 when it finishes, were fascinating in this country. There were the years of Britpop, Oasis, all of that. There was the story of Princess Diana and the royal family becoming a story of its own. There was the millennium, of course, which was huge, the build up to it. And then other international events like the Iraq War. So there was an awful lot to write about. The book is obviously not a history book in that sense, and it looks at things through the lens of people's personal lives, from the bottom up. So you've got episodes or letters where you've got one family queuing up for hours to get into the dome, which, if people remember the dome, that's exactly what everybody did if they wanted to go there. People going to demonstrations against the Iraq War. There's an episode where it's the day after the Princess of Wales has tragically died, and one of the neighbours goes and it was child's birthday party in the road where the events take place, and somebody goes and takes down the balloons from the gate because they think it's disrespectful. So it's looking at how things affected people in this country through those years. And yeah, I did do a lot of research. And I spent ages fact checking. So if anybody comes up with something that I've got wrong, I'd be very appreciative to know. And just one example is that something that I got quite obsessed with the detail. And I was writing about the Docklands Lights Railway because Robert, the solicitor, is a bit of a train nerd. And he's explaining at one point about how the part of the Docklands Light Railway into one of the stations, Marsh Quay, was actually altered because the curve was so sharp, it was posing problems. So that's gone into the book because I thought that was a precious little fact. Yeah, I did do a lot of research, and by the time I came to the end of the book, I knew a lot more about the world I'd grown up in than I did before I started.
That's one of the things that drew me in as well, because it was the period that I sort of grew up in, and I'd forgotten loads. So you sort of reminded me a lot of what I'd experienced as, sort of growing up in those times. But I'd forgotten also completely about the TV show El Dorado, and because that gets a mention in it as well. So it was sort of all these little nuggets of cultural history that I'd forgotten as well. So that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that part of it too. Now, as we mentioned, there's humour throughout the story. Did you start off writing it as a humorous novel, or did that just appear as the characters developed?
It always had to be a humorous novel. I suppose you could have tried writing it non-humorously, but because I was working from my raw material, from my box, most of the letters are full of bits of humour that people inject into them, sometimes unintentionally. But you really do have people writing 1 minute about something very, very grave and serious, and the next minute they're talking about the cat's prostate problem, which of course is serious for the cat, but it doesn't always come across as serious. So the letters were always going to be funny, and I have written, over the years, I've written a lot of humorous stuff. I've written humorous plays and short stories, and I've currently just finished our local village panto that I do every year. It's just my style, and I guess the idea of the book lent itself to my style. So yes, it was always going to be humorous.
Oh wow, that's amazing! So you get to do the panto, do you, every year as well? That's fantastic.
Lucky, it's been going for over 20 years, and I'm one in a sort of line of people that has been honoured to write it. I co-write it actually with somebody else in the village, who is just such fun to sit and write comedy with somebody else. It's brilliant.
Oh, well, it's paid off massively. So, A Perfect Year won the self-published category of the Comedy Women in Print Prize in 2025, which is dedicated to celebrating witty women's writing. So, congratulations on that. That was a fantastic thing. So, what did it mean to you to win that accolade?
Oh, it was just the most. I never thought I would. It was amazing. The award itself is a national award. It's run by the well-known and indefatigable Helen Lederer, people will know from television and her books and writings. She's just a complete power force. And To get recognition through a award like that is unbelievably rewarding. Writing is lonely. I mean, you do spend hours sitting alone in a room in front of a computer and staring out of the window into space. It's the only way you can do it. And so to round off a sort of 2 or 3 lonely years in a way by going to a room full of people and receiving an award like that was just so heartwarming for me. And it's also great that this award exists, because to recognise women writing comedies is something that hasn't really been done before, and it's brought it all into the limelight, and some fantastic people are getting recognised through that award. So I was very, very honoured to be part of it.
No, it's absolutely fantastic. And actually, you saying about sort of writing being a very lonely experience and that kind of thing. So in that respect, what's the best piece of writing advice you've ever received, or what piece of writing advice would you give to anyone starting to write that you might have learned over the period of your writing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the main advice I would give is, and it's a cliche that I kept reading, but it finally came home to me, and it's about giving yourself permission to do something. And it might not be writing, I suppose. It could be, music or art or anything somebody has always wanted to do. But once you say, right, I'm going to do this, it kind of works. I said, I'm going to sit down and write every day. And I found my routine, which was to start at about 9 in the morning after breakfast. And I made it a priority. So it's giving yourself permission and making sure you make it a priority. I would say. And the other thing I would say is push on through the hard bits, because there were so many bits that I came to. In fact, I wrote a whole chunk, and then I left it a few weeks and went back and had a look at it and realised that the style was all wrong and it really needed attacking. So I had to go back and do bits, and there were other areas where I couldn't think. I always knew what was going to happen in the end and roughly where it was going, but finding the way there is the hard bit, and you have to really be prepared to think things through. So that's more than one bit of advice, isn't it?
Well, that's 3 for the price of 1. That's great advice. Thank you very much. So here at Calibre, obviously accessibility is at the absolute heart of everything we do, and we're passionate about making sure that books are accessible for the community that we serve. We're absolutely delighted to be recording A Perfect Year into audio for our members and who can borrow it and have it made accessible. So just as out of interest, do you listen to audiobooks at all as part of your reading habits, or are you sort of a print person? And if so, if you do use audiobooks, when do you use them?
I do use them, not regularly. I'll tell you what, I'll begin by telling you when I don't use them. One is in bed before I go to sleep, because I drift off so easily when I'm listening to something, and I just wouldn't have the patience then to go back. I know the technology is amazing now and you can go back to different places in books, but I wouldn't have the patience, I should say, to go back and do that, and it would disrupt the flow. So not in bed. And secondly, not when I'm cooking, because I need to concentrate. I listen to the radio and podcasts a lot when I'm cooking, but if I got caught up in a book, I know that whatever I was cooking would end up getting burnt. So not when I'm cooking. So those are the two no's. I had a marvelous experience listening to the whole of Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea while I was on a cross trainer at the gym, because that's just a repetitive activity for me that I can do without having to think. And the same would apply to walking, I suppose, but this has always stuck in my mind, and I just so enjoyed listening to it, that particular book, while I was doing that activity at the gym. So that's something that worked for me, listen to an audiobook.
Great, and that's what you just said. Some of the reasons there where people would listen to them or not, as it were. So that's a great example actually from there, and it shows how you can multitask as well with audio. So you can concentrate on the story, but actually there are things that you don't need to think about while you're doing it, and it actually makes those tasks more pleasant. Not everyone loves going to the gym, do they? But if you've got an audiobook in your ear, you might be more inclined to go. I suppose.
Equally, if I was the sort of person that did knitting or embroidery or could do it without thinking about it, I'm sure that would work, but I'm not good enough at either of them, so I would have to concentrate and all the stitches would get dropped.
So on the same sort of subject then, what sort of, in order for you to sort of, relax and kick back and enjoy a book, what authors or books do you turn to when you're looking for that pleasure or enjoyment from reading?
Absolutely everything. Really everything. The best thing I've ever done is to join a book group, because I always thought that I was an avid reader with broad tastes, but I wasn't really. And being in a book group, certainly the one I'm in, everybody takes it in turns to choose the next book, and everybody has slightly different tastes. And it means that I've read all sorts of extraordinary books that I would never have read if I hadn't been recommended them. And I suppose it's like anything in life, there's nothing to beat personal recommendation. And of course, it's marvelous to be able to sit down and discuss them as well. But I will, some of the books I've loved, everything by Hilary Mantel. Just read a wonderful book called The Fortnight in September, which was published in 1932 and which has had a bit of a revival going on. Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver is one that I absolutely loved. And I've just been picking up something that I missed out years ago, which is the books of Edna O'Brien, who died a year or two ago. So those are just some that I've loved. But before I joined the book club, believe it or not, I was an avid science fiction fan and read loads of science fiction. So there you go, everything really.
Well, that's a massively diverse reading range, and we're big fans of book groups here. So for all the reasons you've just stated, actually, as well. So fantastic. They're a great way of kind of, as you say, branching out and reading things that you might not have kind of thought about or read before. So that's a great selection. Thank you very much. So as we have mentioned, this year is the National Year of Reading, and that's a major UK-wide campaign for us to really reignite a love of reading for pleasure across all ages. And so with that in mind, we're kind of looking to inspire others by asking people what book or experience or story made you into a reader. Do you remember?
I can remember 2 or 3 books from my childhood that certainly kind of lit the spark. There's the famous Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pearce, which if anybody out there hasn't read it, must read it or read it to their children or grandchildren. It's wonderful. A kind of beautiful, romantic with an element of mystery. So that and many other books from my childhood. But the other experience, beyond any shadow of a doubt, is I was always going to the library and getting books out every week, more than once a week often. And you hear so many authors saying they did the same thing. And without a library being there so that you could just dip in and experiment, I think it's the most important thing there is to help people start reading. And of course, there are libraries as physical buildings, but it doesn't have to be a physical building. There are, libraries like, I think, Calibre, which operate using modern technology. There are different ways of offering people library experiences now. And I just hope that, the library will keep going, because that was definitely my starter experience that got me into reading and writing later on.
Brilliant. No, absolutely. And that's so, well, as a librarian, you've just warmed my heart there anyway. So thank you very much. That's a great answer to that. So I cannot let you go without asking if you can possibly give us a sneak preview of any other projects you might be working on at the moment, or let us know.
I've been so busy promoting A Perfect Year. I have got an idea kind of marinating at the back of my mind, but I'm afraid it's not far enough advanced at the moment. But if it does, as and when it does advance, I will make sure that you are among the first to know.
Thank you very much. I'll be eagerly waiting, having read that as well. It's absolutely fantastic. So just thank you so much, Ruth, for joining us today and giving us an insight into your fantastic novel and your background into writing as well. We're really delighted, as mentioned, to be recording your book for our members to borrow and enjoy. So A Perfect Year will be available to borrow from our collection, and the catalogue number for that will be 23279. I can thoroughly recommend it. It's a really cracking good story, and it's told in a really engaging format. Most importantly, it will make you laugh, which makes it even more attractive for me as well, and should do for others as well too. And I kind of hope that it gets people back writing round robin letters as well. So I kind of want that to be a thing again. I know I still get the odd couple, but you're right, it's sort of it petered out, isn't it, because of all the other technology and things. So I'd love people to go back to sort of pen and paper and and start writing them again, and that might give us future authors ideas for other books as well. So who knows where it could lead. So that only leaves me to say a really big thank you to you, Ruth, for joining us today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to you and everyone at Calibre for having me. It's been a lovely chat. Thank you.